Hi, everyone. I love talking about strategic communication planning, so hopefully you'll enjoy it as much as I do by the end of this conversation. So the very first question as you're getting started is whether it makes sense to use communication as part of your suicide prevention strategy in the first place. You may find that your suicide prevention goals focus around something that communications may not really suit. Another consideration is that communications work can take up a lot of time and resources, so we really want to think about how you can best use the limited resources that you have. So what do we know about successful communication materials? It probably comes as no surprise, but successful communication materials are systematically planned with lots of time dedicated to that planning process. On the left is a list of key planning steps that you'd want to take as you plot out your communications work. The important thing to note here is that how piece, so whether you're making posters or creating social media campaign materials, doesn't really happen until quite far down that planning process. Communication material also needs to be tied to an overall strategy. So messaging can't solve all health issues and really needs to be incorporated into your other efforts. This goes back to understanding what other resources are out there, what other campaigns might be happening, so that you have a full understanding of what else is out there. And then there's that other question of what's your organization's capacity. This is also a good time to consider if there's any partners or consultants that you can engage to help you with this process. In order to be successful, you really need to kind of think about how this is all tied into your overall program efforts. It also seems really basic, but we want our communication work to have a clear audience. So a lot of times we can be tempted to create a campaign that addresses just the general public or, say, your entire student body. But this approach really limits your possibilities for success. Instead, you will want to think about your audience as narrowly as possible. So this isn't to say that you can't create a variety of materials to address different audiences, but you should have an audience in mind that's as specific as possible and different objectives potentially for each. You may also want to consider who your primary and secondary audiences are. So primary audiences are also known as the target of change, or the person whose behavior we hope to ultimately change. And then a secondary audience is sometimes known as an agent of change, or someone who has influence over that primary audience. So for example, you may have a goal of increasing help seeking in a specific youth population, and for this, the youth are the primary audience. And then their parents could be the secondary audience because they have influence over their children's behavior. Once you've narrowed down that audience, it's time to, again, think a little bit more critically about your objectives. So exactly what do you hope they will do after seeing your communication materials? And how does this tie into your overall program goals? In addition to that objective, you want to have a really clear call for action of what we want people to do after seeing our messages. So it's not uncommon for people in the field to say that their communication objective is to raise awareness. But often in an attempt to help people understand the scope of the problem, we paint a really bleak view on suicide prevention. And the general public tends to already understand that suicide is a problem and can be prevented. They also tend to agree in surveys that everyone should have a role in preventing suicide and that it's important to invest in suicide prevention. What tends to get lower scores in surveys about suicide is knowing how to take action. So we're really missing those valuable opportunities when we focus in on just the severity of the problem. I want to just pose to you again a quote from this expert panel. It's really time to shift from communicating for awareness to communicating for action. And then pre-testing your materials is especially important because your audience alone is going to know what's going to resonate most with them. So I could create a campaign that seems really great to me in my head, but when you roll it out with the audience you're intending, it could totally miss the mark or mean something different. So pre-testing is essential. And then lastly, successful communication materials are evaluated because this really will help you determine, first of all, if you're successful, but also help you figure out where you need to go next with future materials or how you want to tweak some things.